Shalom HaDavarniks. I want to welcome you to the very first session of our class, The Jewish Life of the Messiah. This is session 1, lesson number 1. Now, the basis of this study will be the 4 gospel accounts of the Messiah's life. These records of the Messiah's life, speech, and actions will be studied simultaneously and harmonized into one continuous chronological story. Now, the Jewish Life of the Messiah is a class that will present a thorough look at Jesus the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, through the eyes of his first century Jewish audience, Jewish contemporaries. And as you take this class, your life will be changed forever as you drink in the glory of God, witness the magnificence of the Messianic person, and examine his life and his ministry from this important and unique point of view. Now, as we go through this video, you'll notice a change of format between sessions 11 and 12. That's because when we did this class previously, we did not have the audio equipment, or I should say the video equipment, available. So the first run through in this class, sessions 1 through 11 were audio only. But then in session 12, the video ministry got going and we began videoing the classes. So sessions 1 through 11, I am going to redo as a video from my office. So that's the format you're seeing now. But session 12 and following are the sessions that were videoed before a live audience. So you'll see a change in venue there. Now the sessions 1 through 11 will probably be a little shorter than sessions 12 and following, because when you're dealing with a live audience, you have other concerns, such as answering questions and handing out special handouts, distributing handouts and things like that. So you will, these first 11 classes will probably run about 45 minutes apiece, while the others will run at least an hour. All right, so that's an update on where we are in sessions 1 through 11. Now, I want to introduce those of you who may not be familiar with the HaDavar website and HaDavar Messianic Ministries to the ministry. You may be coming to this class directly on YouTube, but we'd love to have you visit our website as well. This is the front page, the home page of our website, and so feel free to rummage around on that home page and take advantage of all that we have for you there. The address of the HaDavar Messianic Ministries website is www.hadavar.org. Very simple, HADAVAR.org, hadavar.org. Now, as you look at the home page, across the top you'll see a menu. So again, feel free to rummage around in that menu and take advantage of what we have there. But the most important section of the menu is this area that I've outlined in red, called the School of Biblical and Jewish Studies. That's the heart of the ministry. We teach the Bible from a Jewish perspective for 2 reasons. 1, so your discipleship will be increased, so that you will understand the Bible from a Jewish perspective and get a deep, in-depth look at the Bible from a very conservative perspective. But secondly, this Jewish perspective will allow you to share the Bible with your Jewish friends. Your Jewish friends tend to be atheist and agnostic. You will tend to know the Bible better than they do. And if you know it from a Jewish perspective, you can share it from a perspective that they will resonate with. So that's why we exist, to improve your discipleship and to improve your ability to reach your Jewish friends. So if you hover over or click on the School of Biblical and Jewish Studies, a drop-down menu will occur. And I'd like you to just come down to, first of all, the page entitled Instructors. If you'd like to learn about any of the instructors that teach classes at HaDavar, this is the page to go to. For example, if you'd like to learn more about me, just click on the Instructors tab and you'll come to the Instructors page, and then just scroll down to the instructor that you're interested in. And for this class, Bob Morris, I'm your instructor. Let's click on my photograph there and it'll bring up my testimony page, and you can learn where I'm coming from personally. And again, feel free to do that with any of the instructors on any of the classes that we have. Now, back to the main menu. This time, click on School of Biblical and Jewish Studies, but this time drop down to the tab Online Classes, the part of the menu that says Online Classes. Click on that, and this will take you to our class page, both the current class that is in session and the previous classes in the online class archive. So if you're looking, for example, if you're looking for the life of the Messiah, you would just scroll down that online class archive. Now you'll notice at the top of the page we have a donate button. That's because HaDavar is a faith organization. We do not charge for any of our classes. And if you would like to help us pay our bills, we survive only because of a dedicated support team made up of people like yourself. So if you'd like to help us day to day, just press that donate button and feel free to give to HaDavar as the Lord leads you. But again, remember, the classes are for you to take, whether you donate or not. Now, one more point: if you complete 80% of the sessions in any class, you will get a certificate of completion. All right, so then just scroll on down the class page into the online class archive. Just keep on scrolling down until you find the class that you're interested in. And of course, in our example here, we stop on Jewish Life of the Messiah. Click on that class and it'll take you to the Jewish Life of the Messiah page. And then you can read the introductory material and scroll on down the page. As you get to the bottom of the page, you'll get to a or I should say the middle of the page, you'll get to a very, very important section. Here in the middle of the page, you will find a number of documents in PDF form. These documents are the outline and material for your class. And again, you can just download them at your convenience and print off what you need and what you'd like to print off. Now, for this class, the index is the first document, and that index will help you find all the pages and handouts, etc., in your class, in the Life of Messiah class. Then, of course, you see the introduction, and then lessons 1 through 16 in PDF form. That is the outline. I'll be referring to those pages. I'll be saying things like, we're now in lesson 2, page 5, or we're in lesson 3, page 5, top of the page. So if you have the outline, this will help keep you abreast of exactly where we are in the class. If you don't have the outline, we recommend that you get it, or at least look at it on your screen, or somehow, if you have dual monitors, you could have it up on your screen. But the outline does contain the majority of the information for this class. And then at the very end, in the third column of this section, you see a document entitled JLM Handouts, sections 1 through 232. And those are the additional handouts that I gave the class when I did this class originally. And so those handouts are available for you as well. All right, now the textbook we're using for this particular class is A Harmony of the Gospels by Thomas and Gundry. Now, you don't have to purchase this textbook in order to take the class, but it is helpful. And it not only is a helpful book, it's a good book to have in your library for your own personal study of the Gospel. So we recommend this book very highly, and we'll be referring to this book constantly throughout the study. Now, in case you're not familiar with a harmony, here is how a harmony operates. A harmony takes parallel accounts in the life of Jesus and puts them in parallel columns on the page. For example, this is page 194 of the Harmony of the Gospels, and at the top of the page we see section 200, the Lament over Jerusalem, and there's one column there. That's because Matthew in chapter 23 is the only gospel writer that covered this particular event. But if you drop down to the middle of the page on the Harmony, page 194, you come to section 201, a poor widow's gift of all she had. And you'll notice there are two columns. That's because Mark and Luke both cover this event, and so it's a parallel passages. They're put in parallel columns, and you can very clearly see how one covers the event versus the other. And here, of course, we see that Mark covers the event in more detail. There's more there. And now let's go on to page 102. This is section 105, the feeding of the 5,000. You can see there's 4 columns on the page. That's because all 4 gospel writers covered this event. And again, you can compare how each gospel writer covered the event to fit the theme of his gospel. All right, that's how harmony operates. Now, Let me talk a little bit about the outline before we actually get into it. This outline is not a formal outline as you may be used to. It's kind of informal. What I've done is I've inserted my comments under basic headings so you don't have to be distracted taking notes. I find myself getting very, very distracted when I take notes and missing a good portion of the material. Now, if you like note-taking, and some people do like it quite a bit, you should have room to do so. I've tried to leave plenty of room on the page for you to take notes. But primarily, I want you to listen and concentrate on what I have to say without distraction, knowing that the major points are contained in the outline and you can refer to them later as when the class is over. You can reread the outline and you can pick up those major points even though you did not take the notes. The major points are there. Now, I have not inserted every word and every comment that I'm going to make. I have attempted to insert only the most important concepts that I want you to take away from the study. So not everything will be there. So if you want to get everything, you've got to have your pen ready. The outline is not exhaustive. It's not exhaustive. And then finally, I'll try to keep you abreast. I'll very carefully try to keep you abreast of where I am in the outline and in the harmony with my comments. All right, now we're on the introduction to the study. We're on page 3 of the introductory section of the study. The heading at the top says Introduction to the Harmony of the Outline, and the first subheading is Course Textbook. And as I've said, the course textbook we're going to have is, or we'll be using, I should say, is A Harmony of the Gospels by Thomas Ann Gundry. Now, these harmonies come in a number of versions. Now, I'll be reading from the New American Standard Version because I think that's the most conservative and the best version to use. However, this Harmony of the Gospels is also published in a NIV version and a King James versions. They may vary a little bit from the NASB. So if you'd prefer the NIV and the King James version, those are available for you. But again, I will be reading from the NASB. Now, when Robert Thomas and Stan Gundry made this harmony, put together this harmony, they chose to divide up the life of the Messiah into sections. The sections you will see on your HaDavar outline. So if you want to look at the harmonies outline on page 7 of your harmony, this is a page from the book, A Harmony of the Gospels. The section numbers on page 7 of the harmony correspond to the numbers in the HaDavar outline. So you see, this is page 7. You see numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right down to 38. So those numbers correspond to the numbers in the HaDavar outline. And I'll refer to the section numbers for those of you who have the harmony, and I'll refer to the scripture verses for those without the book. You can still follow along without the book. All right, next subheading is approach. And there's two aspects to the approach of a harmony of the Gospels. The first aspect is geographical. And now we're at the introduction. We're on page 3. We're in the middle of the page of the introductory material. Now, there are a good number of harmonies available on the life of the Messiah, and they divide them up into different ways. Some harmonies use geographical divisions, and that is the traditional way that most harmonies are set up. Now, you have a chart on page 6 of your outline. Take a look at that chart, and you'll see an example of that chart, The Life and Ministry of Christ by J.P. Moreland. And he has divided the life of Messiah up into for example, the early Judean ministry, early Galilean ministry, later Galilean, later Judean, Perean ministry, etc. So he has taken a geographical approach, like many harmonies do. Now, back on page 3. Now, there's nothing wrong with a geographical approach to outlining the life of the Messiah. But geographical divisions are not the only way to divide up, look at his life. They're not the only way to divide up the Gospels. And there does, from my perspective, there is a drawback to the geographical approach. This kind of approach can cause you to miss relationships between incidents that are not geographically related. And the relationship between the two incidents may not be apparent, therefore, in the geographical approach. So I won't be covering the life of the Messiah in strictly a geographical sense. I'll follow an integration of two approaches, and the second approach is in the bottom of page 3, the thematic approach. The thematic approach. I'll use both a geographical and a thematic approach. By that I mean that I'll introduce and note important themes we encounter as we move through the study. The advantage of the thematic factor is that we'll see the relationship of one section to another, of one event to the next, even if they are geographically separated, and even if they're separated by time. If they're separated by time and space, we'll still see their relationship. And in that way, we'll get a better picture of the life of the Messiah. We'll see that all incidents that are recorded in Yeshua's life have a reason for being mentioned. There's a reason for them being there, and there's a relationship between one another. For example, important events happen north in the Galilee that are later picked up in the south in Jerusalem. You don't want to miss that relationship. Important events happening in the north in in the north in Galilee are then picked up in the south in Jerusalem. A thematic approach will bring those together, while a geographical approach might miss. All right, we're at the top of page 4 in the introductory section. The heading is Jewish Backgrounds. Another aspect to this study of the life of Messiah is that we'll be going deep into first century Jewish backgrounds. An advantage to the thematic factor is that we deal with the issues as the issues were faced at the time of Jesus and when he was dealing with them. The Judaism that Jesus faced was the Judaism of the Pharisees. Now, many statements that are often misunderstood are misunderstood not because the words are unclear, but they're misunderstood because people don't understand the Jewish thinking behind the statement. Too many commentators have a tendency to go back to Roman and Greek tradition, Roman and Greek culture when dealing with a statement. And by and large, the events of the Gospels take place in the context of Jewish culture and Jewish tradition. Many of the issues faced were prominent in the Jewish culture of Jesus' day. For example, Yeshua's claim to kingship and its subsequent rejection will be heavily related to Pharisaic Judaism. Also, many statements that Gentile believers fight over will become quite clear when viewed from a Jewish context. So there's no reason to argue. An expression like born again can only be fully understood when it's put into its Jewish thinking and culture of the day. You see, interpretation, when it comes to interpretation of a text, whether it be the Bible or some other ancient text, when you come to interpret the text of the Bible, it must be interpreted in the manner in which it was understood by the audience to whom it was written. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to them. Okay? It might make, if we interpret it from a 21st century Western point of view, it might make perfect sense to us, but not to the audience who Jesus was speaking to. And that doesn't make sense at all. Jesus was speaking to a first century Jewish audience. So we must interpret what he said from that perspective. We go with the assumption that he wants them to understand what he's saying. Once we understand what he's saying to them, then we can principalize it and bring it to us. What he said to them and what he said to us have the same lesson. All right. Middle of page 4, reading requirements. Now, you may want to read ahead in the class and ahead of the lecture. So if you do read ahead, if you come to a section of parallel accounts where Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all talk about the same incidents, please read all the accounts. Well, if only 2 of them or 3 of them talk about the incident. Whenever you come to an incident, it's got more than one column, please read all the accounts. If you don't have a harmony, please read all the passages that are noted on your outline. Those are the parallel accounts. Now, the way each writer covers his version of the event is based upon the theme of his gospel. He'll treat the event with his theme predominantly in view. So we'll be relating the differences in emphasis each writer has as he records each event. So please be sure to read all parallel accounts that you encounter. Try to note the differences in emphasis that each writer chose. Now, I will not be reading every verse of every section. So read ahead, be familiar with each section. I'll be just reading the key verses in each section, and I can be jumping from column to column to column as I do so. So if you read ahead, make sure you read everything so you'll be familiar with everything. All right, page 5 of the introduction. The heading reads, Basic Divisions of the Harmony. So you see that Thomas and Gundry divided up the life of the Messiah into 13 major divisions. And the basic divisions in the harmony are laid out on page 5. And you can see all 13 there, a preview of who Jesus is, the early years of John the Baptist, the early years of Jesus the Messiah, etc., etc. So that is the basic divisions of the harmony. Now let's go to page 7 at the top of the page. And the heading is the Golden Rule of Interpretation. The Golden Rule of Interpretation. This is critical information that you should master for your own personal Bible study. This is the correct way to interpret the Bible. And believe me, there is a correct way. The Bible just does not teach just anything under the sun. So let's take a look at this Golden Rule of Interpretation by Dr. D.L. Cooper. Here's what he said. This is what he laid out, and it's good to memorize this. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. Therefore, take every word in its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning, unless the facts of the immediate context, studied in light of related passages and axiomatic and fundamental truths, indicates otherwise. Okay. The basic rule. Here is the basic rule. That is a big sentence to memorize, isn't it? But here's the basic rule. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. Therefore, take every word at its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning. In other words, the text of the Bible is to be taken exactly as read, unless there's something significant in the context indicating that the statement should be taken some other way than literally. That is, as a symbol or figure of speech, something like that. So we have to look at the caveats in the second half of the rule. And the first key word we come to is the word unless. Unless. Take it at its primary, ordinary, usual meaning, unless. Why? Why do we use the word unless there? Or why did Dr. Cooper put the word unless there? Because the plain meaning may not always be the intended meaning. For example, let's take a look at John 10, 7 through 9. So Yeshua said to them again, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved. He will go in and out and find pasture. Now, is Jesus literally saying that he is a door? Is what he's literally saying? Is he saying that he has hinges on his hip and on his shoulders and he goes back and forth and he's hooked up to a room? Of course not. Is he saying that you and I as students, you and I reading John 10, 7 through 9 are literally sheep? We have a nice fuzzy fur and we go bah all the time? Of course not. It'd be silly to think that, wouldn't it? He's talking about he being the way in and out to salvation. He's the door to salvation. We know what doors do. You go in and out through doors. He's the one. He's the one who has to open the way to you. Okay? So he's talking symbolically there. Now, another example. I like this one. Luke 13, 31 and 32. Just at that time, some Pharisees approached, saying to him, Go away, leave here, for Herod wants to kill you. And he, this is Yeshua, Jesus, said to them, Go tell that fox. Well, did Jesus mean that Herod literally was a orange dog, about dog size, medium dog size little creature? No, he was talking about the nature and character of a fox. A fox is clever, shrewd, and that's the way Herod was. Herod was clever and shrewd in a very evil way, of course. So in that way, he was like a fox. So again, symbols and figures of speech are recognized in the golden rule of interpretation. Okay, so that's our first key word. Take every word and its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning, unless. The next key word is context. Next key word. You must memorize this word. Context. Context is king. Many people say, well, the Bible teaches anything you want it to teach. Anything you want goes. Well, no, that's not true. The Bible does not teach anything under the sun. The Bible teaches only one thing if the statement is kept in context. If a word is kept in context, if a phrase is kept in context, the Bible only teaches one thing. Here's an example. The Bible states 14 times that there is no God. Does the Bible teach atheism? Here they are. 14 times, you guys. See, Deuteronomy 32, there is no God. 1 Kings 1:6, there is no God. Psalm 10:4, there is no God. There is no God, there is no God, there is no God, there is no God, there is no God. 14 times. And of course, each of those phrases were taken out of context. But does the Bible teach atheism? There is no God? Well, let's put one of those phrases back into context. Let's pick on Psalm 53:1. For the choir master, according to Mahalat, a maskil of David, there is no God. There it is. There it is in Psalm 53:1. Taken out of context. Now, let's put that phrase back into context. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and have committed abominable injustice. There is no one who does good. The Bible does not teach atheism, does it? But in this particular context, it's teaching about atheists. And the atheists are viewed in very low esteem by God. Atheists are viewed as corrupt, unjust, and people who do not do good because they reject the ways of God. That's what the Psalm 53:1 is teaching in context. All right, context is king. The Bible can only teach one thing if kept in context. Next key word, related passages. Now this is a reference to cross references because the range of context is not simply the word. A word fits in a phrase in a sentence in a paragraph in a chapter in a biblical book. So you may have to go to other books or other chapters to find cross-references that relate to the section that you're studying. But not only does a related passage fit in, maybe hovering in a biblical book, remember the whole Bible is your context, and culture is part of the context as well. So remember those related passages when you interpret the Bible. Next key word is the word axiomatic. What is an axiom? An axiom is a self-evident or universally recognized truth. It's something you don't have to prove, okay? For example, gravity exists. I don't think I need to prove to anyone watching this video that gravity exists. We're all glued pretty strongly to our seats, aren't we? Now, there are some people that think they can jump off a building and fly against the force of gravity, and we put those people into psychiatric hospitals, don't we? Those people who think they can fly. So an axiom is a self-evident or universally recognized truth, an axiomatic truth. Okay? The final key word in our golden rule of interpretation is fundamental truths. A fundamental is an essential or necessary part of something. A fundamental truth, for example, would be God is love, or God is one. Those are two fundamental truths that we can't ignore when we interpret the Bible. So this is the golden rule of interpretation that I'll be seeking to very carefully follow when we're exegeting the life of the Messiah. Let's read it one more time. It is so important. It is so important. Please take some time and memorize this golden rule of interpretation for your own personal Bible study. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. Therefore, take every word at its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning, unless there's a darn good reason you shouldn't. Unless the facts of the immediate context, studied in the light of related passages and axiomatic and fundamental truths, indicates otherwise. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, for this wonderful interpretive rule. Wonderful rule. All righty. Let's go to Lesson 1 now. Turn the page of your outline to Lesson 1, page 1, and you'll see a little mini table of contents. This table of contents has part 1 at the top there, a preview of who Yeshua is, section 1, Luke's purpose for writing a gospel, section 2, John's prologue, section 3, Yeshua's legal lineage, etc. So parts 1 and 2 fit into lesson 1. Our parts 1 and 2, sections 1 through 7, will be covered in lesson 1. All right, so let's now turn to lesson 1, page 2 of your outline. So part 1 is a preview of who Yeshua is. Section 1, Luke's purpose for writing his gospel, for writing a gospel. Now, as you can see on your outline, this first section is introductory. It's a preview. That's the title at the top. Section 1 deals with the reason why Luke wrote his gospel account. And I'll use section 1 here to deal with a general overview of each gospel. We'll preview each gospel under this idea of a preview of who Jesus is. So let's look at the problems each gospel writer faced. We're at the top of page 2 now. The heading is the problem, and the problem is choosing the material. Choosing the material, what to write about. As the 4 gospel writers approach the life of Yeshua, they couldn't possibly tell us everything that Jesus said and did. And John says this in John 21, verses 24 and 25. He says, "This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And there are also many other things," see that? "which Jesus did, which, if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written." Isn't that amazing? Wouldn't you like to know what all that other stuff is? When we meet John in the kingdom, we're going to have plenty of time to talk with him. We're going to be floored. We're going to be stunned by some of the stuff he witnessed, and he just didn't have the space to tell us about. So John comes to the life of the Messiah. Now let's diagram the life of Messiah in a hypothetical way. Here's the life of Yeshua. Let's say that the life of Yeshua only contains 15 incidents. You know, it probably contains 15 million, but we can only put 15 down on this chart. Okay. Now that's a chart of the life of Yeshua. That's an example. Now John comes and he overlooks the life of Messiah, and he realizes, as he looks at that chart there, he can't record for us everything that Jesus said and did. He can't record all 15 incidents. So John says he recorded only a small segment of what he was an eyewitness to. So, for example, John chooses to record incidents number 3, 9, and 14. So that's our book of John. Now, when Matthew comes to write his account of the life of Messiah, he looks over everything that Jesus said and did. He too realizes he can't put it all down. He prays about what he should record. God responds to his prayer by impressing upon his mind a theme. And based on that theme, Matthew picks out incidents from the life of Jesus that illustrate that idea. He picks and chooses specific events, specific episodes. He chooses some and he rejects others. putting only the appropriate events into his gospel account. So here's Matthew, and he chooses events 1, 4, 9, and 13, for example. All right. Mark comes along, and he does the exact same thing. But the theme that God wants him to write about is different. As a result, he goes through the same procedure of picking events appropriate for his theme, and he picks, for example, events 1, 5, 11, and 15. Luke comes along. Luke does the exact same thing. Events 2, 9, 12, and 15. Now, there's our four Gospels, symbolically portrayed there. Some of the Gospel writers' choices will overlap. For example, I put a circle around incident 9 in the life of Yeshua, and you see incident 9 is recorded in Matthew, Luke, and John, each in a different location. Because when they chose to record the same incident, they would choose it for different reasons. They would choose each incident for different reasons. As they record the incident, the way they record it will vary according to the emphasis of their individual theme. Please note, the Gospels are not contradictory. You know, many people, liberal, unbelieving scholars, Jewish anti-missionaries especially, criticize the New Testament for being unreliable and inconsistent and contradictory. But that's not the case at all. The four Gospels are complementary, not contradictory. Okay? They're complementary. The four Gospels are like four witnesses at each corner of an intersection viewing an automobile accident. For example, here we are. Here's the intersection of Irvine Boulevard and Sand Canyon Avenue. And we have four spectators at each corner. We got Matthew, we got Mark, we got Luke, and John, each hanging out at each corner. And what happens? What happens? All of a sudden, there come these two cars in, boom! Right in the middle of the intersection, there's a crash. Each eyewitness report, Matthew's report, Mark's report, Luke's report, John's report, will be a little different because each eyewitness will view the accident from a different perspective. You see, the gospel writers had to be selective. They had too much material from which to choose from. That's what John just told us. And so as a result, they recorded the material that was important to them and their theme. It was important to them and their point of view. So let's now compare the Gospels. Let's compare each Gospel. And please refer to your chart, different aspects of the Messiah presented in the four Gospels. This is the outline, Lesson 1, page 3. Page 3. Now, I won't go through all the aspects listed on page 3. I want to highlight some important ones. I want to highlight the bold aspects on your chart up there at the top, okay? Now, before I go any further, let me explain what the word synoptic means. You will often hear Matthew, Mark, and Luke referred to as the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have been collectively called the Synoptic Gospels since the 18th century, so it's a fairly recent title. In the 18th century, scholars began studying the Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in books with parallel columns. And so the columns were called synopsis. Synopsis literally means to see together. It's derived from the Greek. They printed the text of Matthew, Mark, and Luke side by side so they could make close comparisons. And we're doing the very same thing with our harmony. That's exactly what a harmony is. Now, Mark is normally considered the first gospel to be written, and you'll see that in commentaries. But most recent scholarship has pretty much concluded that Matthew, not Mark, in all probability was the first gospel to be written. So that's the position we're going to take here. We'll start with Matthew in the first column. So let's take a look at the different aspects of the Messiah presented in Matthew. So the first aspect we want to look at is the theme. Matthew's theme is Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, the King, the mighty King. His audience is a Jewish audience. Then we come to the need for the gospel. You see, each gospel writer wrote his account in order to meet a need. Naturally, the first need would arrive among the Jewish believers, since in the early days of the church, all believers were Jewish. Now, as a result of the martyrdom of Stephen in the book of Acts, and the subsequent persecution that follows in the book of Acts, the Jewish believers were dispersed. They were no longer under the central authority of the apostles. Up until the stoning of Stephen, the Jewish believers stuck together under the direct authority of the apostles. And the apostles were eyewitnesses to the life of Messiah, so they could propagate vocally, orally, all that Jesus said and did. But now the believers are dispersed, and they need an authoritative source to refer to as they continue to proclaim Yeshua HaMashiach, the King of the Jews, Jesus the Messiah, King of the Jews. So to meet that need, Matthew wrote his gospel. For Jewish believers, he provided an authoritative source for all that Jesus said and did. Now, the last thing we'll talk about is the concern. What were Matthew's chief concerns? Now, a typical question that a Jew would ask then and now is this. If Jesus really was the King Messiah, why in the world wasn't the kingdom set up? He didn't fulfill prophecy about setting up the kingdom, so he can't be the Messiah. That's a typical objection even today. And Matthew explains in his gospel why the kingdom was not instituted. You see, he faced the same issue that we face today. So that's why the gospel was written. The kingdom was not instituted even though Jesus was indeed the King of the Jews. He explains what scripture was fulfilled at the first coming. And so I've summarized that under the statement, aspect number 4, under the statement that it might be fulfilled. That it might be fulfilled. So the purposes for Matthew's gospel are twofold: to show that Jesus was the king, and to explain why the kingdom had not been set up. It was first coming, not second coming prophecies that are being fulfilled. Okay? It was first coming prophecies, not second coming prophecies that are being fulfilled. Now please remember, the Messianic coin has two sides. Now anti-missionary rabbis and others like to flop the Messianic coin down on its face so that only the royal Messiah, the reigning Messiah, is visible, that side of the coin. And they'll say, see, Jesus is not the Messiah king, he didn't set up the kingdom. See, it says it right there, right on the Messianic coin. What you have to do is say, the Messianic coin has two sides. You need to pick up the coin, set it on an edge, and turn it around so that the suffering Messiah side of the coin comes into view. Okay, there are two sides to the Messianic coin. The suffering Messiah side and the reigning Messiah side, and the rabbis know it. Don't let them get away with flopping the coin down so that only the royal Messiah is visible. Alrighty. Matthew is also writing to Jews in light of impending judgment. The judgment soon to come upon the nation is the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem in AD 70. So keep that in mind. All right, let's move on, and we'll consider the Gospel of Mark. Aspect number 1, the theme. Mark's theme is Yeshua HaMashiach, the servant of the Lord. He is the obedient servant of the Lord, developed in Isaiah 42, 49, 50, and 52, 52, 53. All develops this idea of the obedient servant of the Lord, the suffering servant side of the coin. The audience that he's writing to is primarily Romans. Now, how did Romans think? What did they feel the world needed? Now, the main interest to a Roman would be rapid action. Rome was a very militaristic, here I got it. It's a very militaristic society. They like the idea of a command given, a command carried out speedily. They like the idea of a servant being given a mission and then completing that mission efficiently. Mark, therefore, emphasizes that Jesus did just that. He emphasizes that Jesus is the ideal servant who was given a mission, who was set out to accomplish that mission with a sense of urgency. And this sense of urgency is seen throughout the book of Mark. There's a sense of getting the job done. Over 40 different times, Mark uses terms like straight away, immediately, forthwith, depending on the translation that you have. So here's the third aspect of Mark's gospel, the need met. The Romans' need to be practical. The fact that they identified with urgent accomplishment, getting the job done. All right. Finally, what's the fourth aspect? The concerns. Mark was Jewish, and he's concerned about the Jewish community. And so, as a result, the Jewish flavor is still there. He portrays Jesus as the servant of the Lord, and so he satisfies the Romans' need for urgent action and obedience. And that's that word straightway. So this fourth aspect is summarized under that word straightway. But, on the other hand, from his Jewish background, the concept of the servant of the Lord, he takes from Isaiah. We saw that earlier. Isaiah developed this theme. Therefore, in his writings, the Messiah is the servant of the Lord, the servant sent by God to accomplish certain missions. Mark takes this background from Isaiah of the servant of the Lord, and he shows how Jesus fits the concept exactly. He shows that what Isaiah said about the servant of the Lord was fulfilled in Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth. So both Roman and Jewish needs are going to be met in the theme of the obedient servant found in the book of Mark. Yeshua, the obedient servant of the Lord. All right, let's move on to Luke. Aspect number 1 of Luke is his theme. His theme is Jesus the Messiah, the Son of Man. Yeshua is the ideal Son of Man, and this is a concept that was introduced in Daniel, way back in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 7. Now, who is his audience? His audience is primarily Greeks. Greeks. Why? Luke was a diaspora Jew. He was very familiar with Greek thinking. He had a lot of Greek friends. And he had a burden, therefore, for Gentile salvation, for Greek salvation. Now, the Greeks were interested in the ideal man. So Luke points out the ideal humanity of Jesus. So he alone records incidents where Jesus develops mentally, physically, spiritually, socially, just like all human beings do. Okay? Now, what about the need? Greeks were also historically minded. They sought the ideal man. They were historically minded. These are the two needs that the Greeks had in their mind. So because of the historical importance in the Greek mind, and because of this need for historical accuracy, this gospel is written. Now in Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, Luke tells us why he wrote the gospel. So here, if you have a Bible, you turn to Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. In your harmony, it's page 19. And we'll be reading that in shortly. So I'll give you time to find Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 if you don't have a harmony. All right. Now in that section, Luke tells us that let's read it right now. Yes, let's read it right now. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Here's what we read. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word have handed them down to us. It seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you might know the exact truth about the things you have been taught. All right, so Luke tells us that he was using certain eyewitness accounts. Matthew and Mark and John are all eyewitnesses of the life of Yeshua. However, Luke is not an eyewitness to any of the events in the life of Jesus. So why does he feel the need to write a gospel when gospel accounts have already been written by Matthew and Mark? See, John had not been written yet. But the eyewitnesses Matthew and Mark had written their accounts. As he implies, he made use of Matthew and Mark. He was familiar with these accounts. But we also know he used material he got from Mary, the mother of Yeshua. We know this because he mentions things that went on in Mary's mind that the other writers know nothing about. Now, the reason why he was led of God to do this is in verse 3. Verse 3, he says, "It seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out to you in consecutive order." That's the key phrase. In the King James, you'll see it translated as in order. In the NIV, it's translated orderly account. In the NASB, it's translated consecutive order. So those words in the NASB, consecutive order, in the Greek means chronological order. That's the idea. He wants to write a chronological account. So Luke is the only gospel writer who attempts to put the life of Jesus in true historical chronological sequence. This is his key and primary contribution. He will be our chronological roadmap. You see, the other writers were not chronologically concerned. They were thematically oriented. Keep that in mind. Matthew, Mark, and John are thematically concerned, thematically oriented. You know, they might record events A and B because those events develop a theme. But event B may have occurred chronologically before event A. So if we assume a chronological sequence, we can be confused by Matthew and Mark. And many 21st century Westerners do just that. They assume that we have two chronological Gospels in Matthew and Mark, and we don't. We have thematic Gospels in Matthew and Mark. See, those two Gospel writers, Matthew and Mark, as well as John later on, the other Gospel writers were not that interested in chronological history. They were interested in significance. They were interested in significance. They wanted to answer the question, why? Not so much the question, when. Now, Luke is very interested in historical sequence, so he takes great pains to arrange his account that way. He does want to answer the question, when and in what order. And this is the advantage and contribution that Luke has to make. And you know, it fits the Western modern mindset very well. So if you might want to recommend to your friends who have never read the Bible before that they start with Luke, because it fits the modern Western mindset. Now we come to parallel accounts. When we come, let me rephrase that. When we come to parallel accounts and the order of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John vary, guess who we follow? Luke is the one we're going to follow, because he alone claims to put his material in historical sequence. The others make no such claim. All right, now let's look at the concerns Luke has. Luke has three main concerns. Number one, Luke has a special concern for the city of Jerusalem. So as we go through this gospel, he'll say things about Jerusalem that others do not say. He's also concerned about Gentiles and the impact that the good news has on them, and we'll see that. And thirdly, he's also very concerned about women and the impact of the good news on them. All right, at this point, we need to tackle the book of John. But however, this is where we ended our class in lesson 1, or session 1. So we will pick up the class in session 2. At this point, different aspects of the Messiah presented in the Gospels. We'll be looking at the aspects presented in the Gospel of John. So thanks very much for being part of this study, and we'll see you next session. We'll see you next session as we pick up our study in session number 2. Shalom.